any questions on the topics that we are talking about today. And so I am going to turn this over to Ebony Hooper from the St. Louis County Department of Public Health, who will do the introduction.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I am Ebony Hooper Boating. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the St. Louis ReCAST grant. And I am joined this afternoon with our program manager. Our team is pretty small, so I'm joined this afternoon with our program manager, Paula Sutherland, who, although I will be the person from who will be hearing voice this afternoon, Ms. Paula is going to be the one that is watching the chat box. And also for those of you who are joining us on Facebook, she'll be watching the comments section on there. So at any time, if you have any questions or comments, you can shoot them into the chat box or send it directly to Paula, and she will make sure that she lets myself and Megan know what's going on in the chat box. And so just a little bit about St. ReCAST. ReCAST stands for Resiliency in Communities After Stress and Trauma, and it's a 5-year, $4.5 million grant that was awarded to St. Louis County Department of Public Health in 2016. And so we are in the 5th year of that grant. And so really the crux of it is centered around participatory budgeting, which we are going to be talking intensely about today. And so I won't now get into all the details of how ReCAST does participatory budgeting, but just know that that is what we use in our project to award projects that are centered around violence prevention, youth engagement, peer support, mental health, and trauma-informed care in the community. And so traditionally, when we think about maybe how money is spent in our community, are you the one that's making those decisions as to how those funds are spent? And so I see different people shaking their head. And so, no. So traditionally, even though it seems so simple and it seems like the answer would be, yeah, I am. We aren't, right? So usually our elected officials or the power that be are the ones that are making decisions about how funds are used in the community. And so participatory budgeting really seeks to shift that. And so this afternoon, we are really going to dive into this webinar, not only understanding what participatory budgeting is, but also understanding how we as residents can use that and advocate for the use of that in our communities. And then we'll also be talking more about really shifting our minds as community residents about how we believe and want other organizations and bodies that are working with our communities, how that engagement should look and how it could look, and really reimagining that and shifting our minds as community residents about how work is done in our community. And so just a little bit about me, because I'm on the panel, right? So a little bit about me. I'm a St. Louis native. I was born and raised right here in St. Louis. I've been with the ReCAST team since 2019, so 2 years now. And I absolutely love community outreach and working with people. Prior to being on the ReCAST team, I was still doing community engagement work in St. Louis, but it was centered around reproductive health and HIV and STI prevention and education and counseling. And then prior to that, I was doing similar work also around HIV prevention and counseling in Ghana, West Africa. And I was a high school biology teacher. So I'm a little bit of a nerd. So I do like talking to people, but really the common thread between all of that is really promoting individuals in their community to feel empowered to be change agents. And so participatory budgeting is a method that we can use to really amplify our community voice. And so with that, I am going to shift it back to our moderator, Megan, who, as she mentioned, is one of our delegates. And so I'm super ecstatic that she'll be moderating this, and also gives a great testament of the power and the voices that we have in our community. And so, Megan, with that, I'll give it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ebony. So first, I would like to introduce our other panelist. Lady Ashley Gregory is the Director of Community Partnerships with Forward Through Ferguson. Lady Ashley is an activist and educator specializing in community equity and inclusion. She is a native of St. Louis, Missouri, and the grandniece of the late civil rights activist Dick Gregory. Lady Ashley uses her work to focus on bringing awareness and dismantling all forms of oppression that affect communities of color. Her educational background consists of an undergraduate degree in human development and social relations from Kalamazoo College and her master's degree in human resources development from Webster University. Lady Ashley's life and engagement in St. Louis has prepared her to better understand systemic inequalities that our communities face and how to work towards overcoming the barriers that accompany them. She loves her city unapologetically, but admits we've got a lot of work to do here. You can see who's doing that work, and that fuels my hope. So Lady Ashley works to uplift her communities through teachings of resistance, self-care, and collective action. Living with multiple life intersections, Lady Ashley Gregory believes we must all get free together through fighting the good fight to bring about change. So I'd like to introduce you to Lady Ashley Gregory. Say hi. And so, thank you for being on. And first, we're going to get started with Ebony, who's going to talk about understanding participatory budgeting and examples of participatory budgeting at work. And again, if you have any questions or comments throughout, please use that chat box, put anything that you want in there. After we've gone through both panelists, we will revisit those comments and questions and have a chance to hear what you all have to say. So we will go ahead and get started with Ebony. Thank you, Ebony.
All right, as I pull up my screen, yes, this is being recorded, and so we will be able to send it out to people, and as well as it will live on our Facebook page, which we are live there right now. And so, you know, after that wonderful introduction of Lady Ashley, I am super excited for you all to get to hear all the wisdom that she's going to pour onto us this afternoon. But before we do that, I really want to ground us all in understanding exactly what participatory budgeting is. And so when you registered for this event, you were asked a question to kind of gauge what you knew about participatory budgeting. And so don't worry, because a majority of you actually said that you either never heard of this before in your life, or maybe you've heard the term, but I don't really know what it means or what it actually is. And so after this presentation, I hope that you will have not only have a better understanding of what it actually is, but also feel empowered to actually push for the use of it in your community. And so on your screen are just some pictures from over the years of ReCAST of our PB process, which I'll talk about a little bit more about momentarily. And so the burning question, what is participatory budgeting? And so what it is a mouthful, right? And so in this presentation, as well as outside of this presentation, you will often hear PB shortened, participatory budgeting shortened to just being called PB. And so definitions first, PB or participatory budgeting is just a democratic process in which community members directly decide how to spend part of a public budget. And so if we break that word down a little bit more, with participatory, we have participate, right? Or participation. And then we have the word budgeting. So we're talking about budgets. And so simply put, participatory budgeting just means that you're participating. You have a role in how that budget is being used. Okay, so we said traditionally, you know, we aren't a part of that process when we think about how money is being spent in communities. And so some things about, as wonderful as it is, and how ReCAST, we've been really using that as a model. We have to give credit where credit is due. And so if you're wondering, why is Brazil up on the screen? So in 1989, PB actually started in Brazil, okay? And there it started as an anti-poverty measure. It started as an anti-poverty measure that helped reduce the child mortality rate by nearly 20% in Brazil. And so since 1989, this model of using participatory budgeting has spread around the world, and including reaching our very own city, right, in St. Louis, Missouri. And so I know that several of you I saw in the registration may not actually be physically here in St. Louis, Missouri, which we are excited about, this reached you. But this tool, it can be used no matter where you are located. So some things that really sets participatory budgeting apart, and kind of like the key features at least, is that it's dealing with real money and real decisions. So it's taking it a little further than just a consultation with the community. So it's more than, you know, community members doing a survey or giving their feedback or giving their suggestions. You know, no, it kicks it up a notch. It's talking about putting the decision-making into residents' hands so that they can make actual real decisions about how real money that's going to go through our communities is spent where they live. Another thing about PB is that it's typically an annual cycle. So it's not just a one-off event. It's usually a cycle that is repeating itself. And so as wonderful as to say that, you know, as community members, we get to decide where every penny of the money is going. In reality, PB usually is talking about a part of a budget. So for example, if we were to think about in our governmental setting, right? So usually our county council or different council made up of our elected officials, there usually is what we call discretionary funds. So discretionary funds, meaning that within the budget, there's usually a pot of money after we take care of all the needs and things that that have to be done. There's usually a pot of money that they have some wiggle room with what they can use it for, and typically for community projects. And so usually when you look at different participatory budgeting processes, we are looking at those parts of the budget to work with. And it also really strives for equitable representation. So, you know, continuing with the governmental example, usually, you know, our elected officials are the ones that are making those decisions. And, you know, ideally, you know, their voice is amplifying the communities that they represent, and they are representing the people's voice. You know, our communities, we are a lot more, we aren't just one dimensional with our identity and our walks of life, right? So I'm much more than just African American, right? I am a cisgendered woman. I'm married. You know, if we look at my socioeconomic status, we look at my different lived experiences and things that I bring to the table because of my lived experience. Or, you know, maybe if we look at, you know, I'm able-bodied, so I don't necessarily have any physical disabilities. All those things really come together to shape, you know, how money, our thoughts and perceptions on how money is spent in our community. And so PB is a way that it should at least strive to diversify the voices that are at the table making those decisions in the community. And so why is participation in budgeting needed. So it really promotes civic engagement. There's something about knowing that you were a part of a process, that you designed something, that you had a say in it, and seeing it actually happen that empowers you, that inspires you to really get involved, right? And so, civic engagement is much more than just voting, right? Because if it was just that, there are a lot of people for a variety of reasons aren't eligible to vote. So civic engagement, it really promotes that. It promotes, participating in other community initiatives that may be going on. Volunteering, maybe if you are eligible to vote but don't necessarily vote, maybe this may be the way that it says, you know what, that experience, I might go to the polls, and I may actually go to the polls for my local elections too, right? And so another feature thing that makes it needed is that it promotes transparency and accountability for the entities that we're working with to do this, right? So if you're a part of the process and saying how the money should be spent, then that means the people holding the money, they got to be transparent about what is actually going on. And then if you created an idea, you definitely can hold your finger up and hold them accountable and be like, hey, what's going on with that project? What's happening? What are the results of that? So it really promotes that. And again, it really seeks to uplift the community's collective voice. So, some ReCAST, we often say, let your voice be heard. And so a lot of times, as community members, we have ideas, we have solutions, we telling everybody about it. And so we really just need the platform for our voices to be amplified so that those in the decision-making roles that have the power to make those things happen can hear us. And so hence the webinar series title, Amplify Your Voice, okay, get it? And so participatory budgeting is a way to really amplify and put some oomph behind what people are saying in the community. And then lastly, public money, it's meant to serve you. And so, who knows better than the community itself about what it needs and how it should be done, right? You know things that other people don't know. You know what solutions would really get people going. If you want to reach this population, then you should go to this street at this time because that's where they're going to be. The popular places in your community, the people that are going to make things happen. And so, public money is meant to serve you. And so you should be the one that gets to have a say in how it's spent. And so what is the actual process? So a little disclaimer, there is no one single model or approach to participatory budgeting. And so there are different ways to go about doing it. But what I'm going to highlight are like sort of the key features that are within a PB process. And so usually there's some sort of first starts off with some sort of committee, whether that's a group of, community members or whomever it is that is going to create the framework and the rules around how this is going to work, right? Because everybody's capacity to be able to do a project or, the amount of money that is able to go into the projects that you're designing will vary. And so someone will have to, take some time to kind of set up, what can we actually do? And then from there, community members are having meetings, right? They're brainstorming ideas to discuss and come to a consensus about what needs to be done in the community around a given topic. From there, they develop proposals. They take those ideas, they get developed into official proposals, and then the community at large is able to vote on what actually will serve the community needs most out of those different proposed ideas. And then those things get funded, and then the process starts all over again. So that is the general process for how PB works. And so, as you think about how this could be done where I live or within a program that I'm participating in, they may say, well, I don't know if we're able to do all of that. Then you could still, challenge them to say, well, what are we able to do? How can we get community involved? Maybe we can't do all of these steps, but maybe we can hold a vote on the things out. Or maybe we can just have community involved in reviewing proposals, so maybe there's different ways that you can go about it. And there isn't just, one way or no way. So it's about making it fit for what you are able to do. And speaking of that, so who can we do this with? So as a community member, who can I reach out to about using this to do things in my community? And so some examples are like community-based organizations. So some local organizations could be a great place to start. Some you may already be volunteering and participating in different programs or things that they have going on. Another group could be faith-based organizations, like churches and things of that nature, whether it's about things out in the community or, the congregation themselves helping decide about things that are going on within their actual church. And then schools. So we have some youth on the line, whether it's, high school or college, schools, you can do this to determine different type of projects, whether it's from a student reaching out to your principal or parents with PTA budget funding. And then another one that we've been talking about is governmental agencies. So whether that is elected official offices or city agencies or larger institutions within that, like where we are from, which is the St. Louis County Department of Public Health. And so on your screen here is just an example of PB at work. And so just last year at the County Health Department, an example of this is we received the CARES Act funding, right? And so that was millions and millions and millions of dollars. And some of that money actually was put aside, 7 million to be exact, was put aside for the community to do a PB process to help decide how funds should be used specifically for access to care funding. And I actually see that some of the community members that participated in this process are on the call. So hello to you. And so that's just an example of PB at work. And so I'll wrap things up with kind of sharing how this actually works for St. Louis ReCAST. And so ReCAST residents who live within what we call the St. Louis Promise Zone, which is a federally designated area that covers parts of North St. Louis County and North St. Louis City. Residents from that area came together to design community projects in our funding areas. All they had to do to participate was be a resident within that area and be 11 years of age or older. And so the community members, we called them delegates in our process. They were trained in areas of facilitative leadership, trauma awareness, racial equity. And for those who helped review proposals, they also got a training on that. And we compensated our delegates for their time, okay, and participating. And so that was how our process worked. Here's a picture of some of those people. So several of you are on the call, so I see you guys. Those, to put it simply, what basically happened is they designed community projects, and then those were turned into proposals. Local organizations submitted proposals and responded to that as to how they could bring this group of residents' ideas to life. Another group of residents came together to review those proposals, and I see some of our proposal advisors on the call here. And then ultimately what happened is the Promise Zone at large had the opportunity to come out and vote about which of those projects were their favorites to be able to receive funding. So on your screen is just a picture of some of our promotion of community voting out in the community. And then again, so your community-based organizations, your faith-based organizations, schools, governmental agencies are all great places to reach out to about doing this work. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Ebony. So one of the things that really drew me to the ReCAST process was the engagement of youth and the centering of youth, and the idea of, folks that can be 11 and older can be participate. So so question for you is, how do you ensure that even when you do get youth involved, that sometimes some of us that have done community work tend to maybe run our mouths a little bit too much? And how do we center the youth voice? How do you make sure that that is put at the forefront and they're heard in this process?
Yes. And so, one of the big things is, sometimes when you work with different groups, the beauty of participatory budgeting is trying to diversify the voices at the table. But at the same time, the way that you would maybe lead a meeting if you were working with, just youth 11 to 14 might look completely different if you were talking about that same subject matter with a group of people who are maybe 60 to 65, right? And so really with the process, it falls back on the staff or the community members that will be facilitating those meetings to really try to incorporate different ways to make space for people's voices and to make sure that they feel that it's a safe space and that, that their voices are uplifted and heard. Especially with our youth, we can do the different recruitment things and go to, non-traditional places to make sure that we're getting those different groups of people. But then once we get them all together, it also takes that extra step of, doing different things. So if people are speaking, making sure to incorporate ways that people can just write their input, or, in this case, put it in the chat box, or have in person, have like a box or something where people can write and put comments in if they want to share input and want it to be anonymous. Or, actually making time as the facilitator to say, we've heard from so-and-so. What about what the youth in the room are thinking? And really building that safe space, because, some people will feel comfortable at talking, and then others may be like, oh man, I can't go against what Miss Megan just said. I have an idea, or I heard her idea, but in my head, I'm like, no, that is not going to work. And so we have to make a safe space, especially for our youth, to be able to voice their opinions, especially when it's not in agreement to what they perceive as an elder has just said in the meeting.
And just to expand on what you said about recruitment, so we think of our typical places you could go to, schools and stuff, but for recruitment around youth and making sure that we have them involved in this process, what are those non-traditional places that you kind of mentioned?
Yeah, so with ReCAST specifically, some of the different places that we tried was also to reach out to people who already are working with youth, and they are, and that they trust those people already. So whether it's different mentoring programs, or, teachers, or, the thing about participatory budgeting is that it's really rooted in civic engagement. So when we were doing things in person, I was able to, talk to teachers and see like, maybe for social studies, we could like kind of make, tie this into, voting and democracy and things like that, to be able to speak to the kids in their classrooms. And then going to like spring break activities, or organizations that are doing work with youth and presenting at places that they just already are going to. Whether that be, rec centers, setting up booths, or, at, barbershops, or, places of that nature where they just already are. And so a lot of it may take, also just even maybe changing. You don't have to change, who you are, but it may take some adapting to be like, all right, if I'm going to talk to youth and I want them to be open and receptive to me, then maybe, maybe me having on my, what I'd wear to work if I work in an office setting, may be a little intimidating. But if I just have on my t-shirt and if I have my cool Jordans that they think are cool, then, it may make me more approachable and relatable when even just speaking to them. So even thinking about those things too, when we're reaching.
Awesome. Okay, and so for my final question is that you spoke about the different places where we can use participatory budgeting. And so we know in St. Louis City, a couple of elected officials have used it. I know some others are talking about it, and so they want to learn more about it. But how do we, and we've seen, and especially right now, the city of St. Louis is getting a lot of money from the administration around COVID. How do we as residents talk to maybe these organizations that are getting quite a bit of money to say, hey, how can we, how can some of this be used in a way that the community has say in, such as through a participatory budgeting process? So do you have tips on how residents can engage those organizations?
Yes, so I would say, especially to the officials, is that, once you identify, if you don't already know who your elected officials are, we can, Ms. Paula is dropping some resources that you can use as an example of in New York, they have a council, their council that they do work with is in that setting, and that can be used as a model. And it can be as simple as, hey, I recently learned about participatory budgeting, and here's an example of it happening in New York. Drop that link, and and then also too saying, so what are the discretionary funds that are currently in the budget? How does that work? How is that being used? And is there an opportunity for your constituents? Because they, you like that word, constituents, the people that they represent. Is there an opportunity for us to have a say in deciding how those funds are used? And then with some of the community organizations, similar, it's about, maybe just asking them like, hey, is there some different ways that we can incorporate residents and us as community members being a part of this process? Because I really enjoyed that. Or, I took the survey and now I want to know what's next. Can I participate in what's next? And then they may be like, oh, okay, let's talk about how we can keep this thing going with the next steps.
Oh, that's very helpful. I've taken quite a few surveys. So that's a great follow-up to that, because usually I just take it and, move on. So awesome. Thank you so much, Ebony, for all the great information. Now we're going to turn it over to Lady Ashley, who is going to talk about leveraging your power, shifting your mindset to utilize participatory budgeting as a tool for community healing and advancement.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Awesome. So I am here to talk to you today about shifting your mindset for using participatory budgeting. So I think it's really important for me to start off and tell you how I got into this conversation about participatory budgeting with ReCAST. So my role is Director of Community Partnerships with Forward Through Ferguson. And this past year, we launched the St. Louis Regional Racial Healing and Justice Fund. It was a collective effort with leadership from Deaconess Foundation, Missouri Foundation for Health, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and with thought leadership of Empower Institute. So from the beginning, we knew this was a very large initiative that we wanted to center Black and Brown St. Louisans based on their lived experience. A cool thing about using the participatory budgeting process for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund is acknowledging that this fund was completely community-led, community-driven, and community-informed. So I think something that I want to state that was really important was our approach. was living into healing and justice and the equity principles and the design process that would be needed to support our community. We had to create this structure from scratch. And that means having funders donate to the pooled fund, and then telling these funders that they contributed to the fund and decisions would be made by the community. And they agreed as funders to be updated, but not to have any influence on the funding priorities or community governance board selection. So it was kind of like, hey, y'all, let's talk to you about healing. Give us your money, and then we're going to ask our community what they need to heal. And so I let you know that because there were a lot of conversations around what serves us. I will say I know, because being youth and now being adult, I grew up knowing that there were certain questions I just shouldn't ask. And I think a big part of participatory budgeting, which Ebony did mention, is understanding who is serving you. These are funds that are for the community, that are decided by the community. And we have to understand that when we step into these spaces that are community-led, lived experiences and community voices are just as important as positions that funders hold, as money that funders hold, as higher education that people may have. We do not place lived experience and higher education on different boundary levels. So that was really important when we centered community. So we had some heart-to-heart conversations that involved some facilitation saying, hey, this is who we're serving, and right now we don't have funding priorities, so we have to ask. We created a community-informed approach where we asked Black and Brown community members, St. Louisans, community healers, community organizers, what they needed to heal. And we offered stipends, gift cards for their time to thank them, to say, hey, your knowledge is needed and it's welcome. And we understand that time is valuable. So we want to pay you for your time and for your knowledge. So that really involved shifting a mindset of value, what we find valuable, who we find valuable. And I think a big part of that is really understanding where our resources as community is, right? And where they are not. So seeing what's available to you and what is not available to you. Understanding if there are barriers and what those barriers look like, whether they be application barriers, access to communication or technology. That means looking at who engages with you through this process. If you're able to get in contact with leadership who should be able to help you. It also really means acknowledging that asking questions is a superpower. There is power and curiosity, and we have to be able to ask what is serving me and what is not serving me. Because in participatory budgeting, your voice, community voice, that transparency that Ebony mentioned, that accountability that Ebony mentioned, that is what we're focused on. So stay curious. And if you see that something is not serving you, use your voice and pull your community to say, hey, this funding that is meant for us, but that is not informed by us, is not serving us. So what can we do to make it serve us? I often think of the James Baldwin quote when he talks about America. And he says, I love this country more than any country in the world. It's the only country I know. It's where I'm from, right? And it's because I love this country that I know I have the right to criticize and question America perpetually, right? So James Baldwin saw this thing that I love is not serving me. So I have the right to ask and address how it's not serving me and make those changes. So that's what I want people to understand. The Racial Healing and Justice Fund really took the time to ask community members what has and has not helped them and what they need to heal holistically in St. Louis, in a city that is strongly shaped by systems that do not serve Black and Brown folks and that center whiteness, and how that trauma affects our community members, and let them be the face of that healing, and knowing that that healing is not linear and that that healing looks different for all of us, even as Black and Brown folks. So what do we need to do that? And then we have a lovely community governance board that were selected by community members. We did an open call. We said, you know, if you have a resume and cover letter, send it, but also send a video, send voice recording, send art, tell us who you are. And in addition to that, we opened up a nominee form so people could say, hey, this is not for me. I understand this is not for me, but this is a community member who's really great. So let me give you their information so you can call them and tell them that they would be a good change for this city. And that's how we got our community governance board, which is made up of a lovely group of Black St. Louisans from St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and East St. Louis in Illinois. And they are the folks who make the decision around the participatory budgeting and who receives the granting initiatives for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, my computer went. Okay, so I do have a question. So what you mentioned that you when you guys went to the funders and said this is what we're going to be doing, what were their concerns? What were any hurdles that you had to go through, or tips that you can share with us that we can use with folks on how to speak to people and address any type of concerns that they had?
You know, I think the biggest concern was not having the answers. And that's understandable for folks who have an identity where they always have the answers provided for them. And it took a lot of honest conversation, a lot of transparency to say, we don't know, and we have to ask, and you have to be okay with that and understanding within your identity, you have the answers and we don't. So that was key. I think really positioning people to understand where their role and power was and what leveraging that power looked like when they really had to be honest about who they wanted to help, why and how, and calling them in if it wasn't healthy and if it was centering themselves. And I think sometimes funders wanting to know what funding priorities will be before we've asked communities what they need is centering themselves and saying, yes, you have had a history where you understand that for your healing or for your initiative, this was a priority that you needed. We understand that. Let us do this work. And a part of building this community and building trust within Black and Brown folks is letting us discuss what we need and decide and come back to you. And leadership and healthy philanthropy means leveraging that power and sometimes giving it up when you're always used to it. So it was a lot of heart-to-heart conversations, which are not easy, but I am happy that we had the capacity and a group of people that once we had those conversations, they understood where we were coming from.
So that leads into my next, you said a keyword, the capacity. So how do we, what do you think are the first action steps that community members can take to feeling this empowerment? So where should they go? Should they have a coalition? Like how big should their group be? What are your tips and recommendations or resources for folks to go to build up this power?
For sure. So there are amazing groups like ReCAST who are doing work and showing a Zoom meeting on participatory budgeting. So really tapping in to your community resources. It can be hard, I think, in the granting process because we're so used to these barriers. And we've seen that with the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, which is why our Community Governance Board has set up technical support sessions before you actually submit your application if you have questions around the granting process. So one of the biggest questions we get is there's no word count for the application. What's the word count? And we tell people we want to ask you what you need. So there is no word count. And we've been put in this box to think that when we apply for grants and when we apply for applications that we have to adhere to these rules that were not made with us in mind. So it's breaking down those barriers, being able to, even if it's not for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, seeing who's engaging with community and saying, hey, I see that you have this framework. This is not something I want to apply for, but using that curiosity to reach out and say, hey, I see what you did. can you give me resources to lead me in the right direction? If you see organizations that are doing work, go to their webpage and look to see who is in your area, to see who you can send an email or make a call to ask the question, even if the resource isn't specifically catered to you in that area, there may be one that is, and all it takes is asking.
All right, thank you so much, Lady Ashley. So now we are going to, now that we've heard from both Ebony and Lady Ashley, we invite your comments and questions. So if anybody has any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box or raise your hand. I'm sure we could hear some voices right now too, other than mine. Anybody have a question? You can use the raise hand thing. I guess we just overwhelmed everyone with so much information and knowledge that everybody's rearing to go. So, but I do have some questions here that we did have emailed to us. So let's see here. Do you feel that our voice is being ignored on important issues by our elected officials? I think that I will throw this to Lady Ashley. And then Ebony too, whoever wants to, whichever one of you wants to answer it, but go right ahead.
I feel within my identity, and I will speak for myself, that I have seen throughout my lifetime in St. Louis that the issues that I want to be paid attention to have been ignored by our leaders. And I think we saw this really largely when COVID hit and we didn't have the systems in place to take care of our folks, right? And when folks said that they needed help, we still didn't see anything done. I think up until this time, we have seen nonprofits, grassroots-led organizations, Action St. Louis, Arch City Defenders, the Rapid Response Team, put these systems in place to help our folks, right? And really paying attention to the mayoral forums that have happened. And now we are moving into a point in time where we will have new leadership. I think that was really important for our city to see how those different candidates that were running for mayor of St. Louis answered those questions in relationship to not only the systems that affect our folks, but also to policies and procedures on how we were to move our city forward. And that gave me a lot of insight as to who had been listening, and even in many of those spaces, who still weren't. So I'm really happy to see how we're going to move forward with Tashara as mayor. I was always very happy to see her listen and answer and not deflect questions based on experience and what people had. So if we were at a time where folks were not hearing us, which we were, I really am looking forward into moving into a time where our voices will be heard.
Thank you. So I do want to ask you one more question that is centered around youth involvement, because you were youth pretty recently, and and you know, I'm just gonna be like really honest. So I'm looking on the call. I'm not sure how many what we would consider youth are really on this right now, which I understand. So that's, you know, that is a struggle within a community association. I think with so many groups that are intergenerational. How do we get youth involvement? So what are your suggestions around that?
You know, I think Ebony hit it on the nail on the head when she said creating safer spaces. I think a big part of creating safer spaces is front loading to let people know that they are welcome holistically within their identity. So that means creating group and community norms, having a set of rules that we will abide to when we are in spaces together, where we communicate that we say when we're there, but also beforehand to let people know that they're safer here. I think it means having common language. You know, I was young, but I'm not anymore. So I know language changes, and that's why I love language, is because it does change. But making sure we're all on the same page. Also, I think front loading. I think a lot of times we assume because we care about folks that we know what they need, and we show up to protect in a way that is nice, but it always doesn't center the person. So we can't be afraid to ask youth ahead of time, what do you need to thrive in this area? If it's something that you need to know, if it's something around accessibility, if it has anything to do with pronouns that you use or that you have or that others may have, let us ask you what you need to thrive and feel safe in this space before it happens. And so when it happens, we know that we're good and we can shut down anything that makes you feel uncomfortable while you're here.
Thank you so much for that. Extremely important. As a mother of 3 children, this is very important with different identities. So I truly appreciate that. So we do have a question from Miss Phyllis Knight. Said, if you are part of a community nonprofit organization that encompasses a housing committee chair, how can you get that chairperson involved? What steps are needed? Ebony, you have some thoughts around that? Oh, you're muted, Ebony.
Of course. I told Paula earlier that I would get a shirt that says you're muted. And so, I think that one of the steps is really sitting down with that person and asking them about, how can things be changed? What can we do better? Because even though, we've put the committee together, we have our different leaders and things of that nature. No one's perfect, and we always have room to grow. Even ReCAST, we learn for year after year, what things can be getting better, what can we shift and change on. And so I think sitting down with that person and really taking time to kind of map out, like, okay, what are we currently doing? What could we do differently? What could we, that can really be a way to get people involved. And people, you could even invite people who are part of the committee to be a part of that conversation in and of itself. And so that could really spark, new and innovative ideas that may inspire people to keep going. Oh, okay. And then they wanted to know, so how can they get connected with us is the is the question. And so I'll make sure that we enter our information. And so anyone, yeah, you could definitely email me at ehooper. I'm gonna put it in the chat box, but I want to say it out loud for those watching on Facebook too. ehooper, so EHOOPER at St. Louis Co. So STLOUISCO.com is my contact information. And then I'll ask that Lady A too, that she can drop hers in the chat box and stuff, our contact info. And I'll be sure to add it in the follow-up that goes out to everyone. So do that evaluation feedback survey for us so we can have your contact information, and I'll put it in that as well.
Yes, and I'm dropping my email in the chat box as well. It's my first name, which is my real name. It's LadyAshley, LadyAshley at forwardthroughferguson.org. And I will drop that in the chat box as well. And I know Ebony will share that with you too.
So I do. So one question, and I've had this question, and I know it's popped up before, is so where can we use participatory budgeting? I think you both kind of touched on it when you both talked a little bit, but if you could expand more of what type of funding. So is it just like federal funding or a grant or what type of funding can I go into someplace and say, hey, you're really doing this for the community. It should be community involved. We want to do a participatory budgeting process. Is there any rules or norms around that?
I wanted to leave
and whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I'm a human being who believes in transparency. So I think folks really need to understand participatory budgeting and how it is regenerative grant making. It is to build capacity within communities so communities have power to make their own decisions, right? That's a values thing, right? And sometimes you realize when you're talking to people about values that those values don't align. But that's another story. I think as long as you are transparent about it being a community-driven decision-making process, and when you approach an organization to see if they have community leadership capacity, which a lot of organizations don't, they have to create a framework for that even. I think that's really important. And then really understanding, like with ReCAST, I know it may be a little bit different, but also the follow-up, the pre-granting process around budgeting. So communications, educating community members and community leaders for us, for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, was a big part of it. Building those trusting relationships with those members and leaders. Developing, a process for group facilitation to address all of the things around race and equity and power dynamics, the group norms that I talked to you about. We had to create an application. Participatory grant making, although it is brilliant and it is revolutionary, it is not common. So a lot of this is building from the ground up, which means also capacity. So really making sure that when you approach folks that they are ready. And I think that's a conversation that I have with our community governance board a lot, is like, whoa, we're really doing this for the first time. And it's like, yes, you are. So be prepared for the process, for the development, for the granting, and to also be able to put your foot down and stand in solidarity with all of your community partners. And with us, that was organizers, our healing practitioners, to back us up and to call us in when we were leaning into things that may not have been the best for community. So yeah, being really transparent and making sure the folks that you approach have those same values that align with participatory budgeting.
Awesome, thank you. So any other questions from audience members on here? I do have my Facebook to the side and I don't see anybody really asking questions either. Oh, Sandra, go right ahead. Do we have to unmute her?
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So if you have a youth that wants to get involved, how do you find out, like, through the different organizations, where's the best spot for that youth to volunteer?
I can take that one. And so I think kind of in the beauty of the conversation, I think of first, really letting that young person tell you, like Lady Ashley mentioned, their values, what are the things that, that they are passionate about, that they would even, like to continue to work on. And so that, that way it's not, us telling our youth like, hey, get involved in this program. They need some youth. It really becomes, them saying, okay, these are the things I'm interested in. These are the things I would like to work in, but can you, as an adult or someone that's older than them, can you help them? Can you help me in identifying, organizations or opportunities that align with this? And so I think from there, there's a lot in our region, even though it may not seem like it. I think that really kind of shows the barrier in the communication around, maybe just not knowing about the resources that exist. And so I think, tapping into, social media. Our youth love social media. So if there's different organizations, different organizations, helping them identify and just doing a Google search and looking through social media, and then just helping connect them with them is something that could be really helpful, because there are things going on, for just throwing, off the top of my head, some things that are like happening right now that I know of through like our ReCAST funding. If there's a youth that's really interested in the arts and the fine drawing and things of that nature, St. Louis Artworks is currently recruiting youth for their summer program. It's a paid apprenticeship, so that's cool too, where they not only get to, learn more about the arts and do artwork and things, but they learn entrepreneurship skills on being able to sell some of their work and other things in the community. So they are currently recruiting. And then I'll try to make sure maybe Ms. Paula can drop some links to these websites. And then another one, CHIPS is a clinic that's in North St. Louis on, what is that, Grand, and I'm blanking, but we know we know that corner with the big church right there, our fellow locals to St. Louis. They are currently recruiting. If you have youth that are interested in like spoken word and, health, they're training another paid opportunity. They're training youth to be peer health educators to talk about violence prevention in the community. And they are currently recruiting. Poetry for Personal Power is another organization that's working specifically with unhoused youth. And so they have opportunities as well. And then, as I get to go, and then I'm always going to forget someone, but, St. Vincent Home for Children is another organization that's also working, within our area and doing programming for youth. So there are a lot of things out there, off the call. I definitely, if people just want to reach out just to know some of the initiatives that are currently going on for you, definitely feel free to contact me.
Yeah, can I piggyback off of that a little bit? I think it's really important too, if there are not already or programs in place, to think about how to input youth voice. So a good example that I have is for the Racial Equity Summit that'll be coming up this summer. There is a youth board. There were a call for folks 16 to 18 to be a part of that youth board to help planning for the Racial Equity Summit. And so if you are a part of an organization that is planning an event or has a board, like consider making space, like leaving space for a youth board. And once that youth board is there, not only making sure they're helping plan the event, but if you have a panel, make sure that there's a youth voice there to kind of like shift the mindset. Because when you're talking to a lot of folks about issues that do affect our youth, if they're adults, like they may have a different mindset. So you bring a youth member into that conversation and it can shift the conversation. So to make sure that they're not only a part of the planning, but they're a part of the action, and that they're a part of the conversation, and that the space is made safe for them while they're there. So think about leaving space for them if it's not there, or making space if it's not as well, if you're in that position of power.
And I will add on to that. SLACO has their board is emerging youth. And so they just, a couple weeks ago before the election, they had a youth-led mayoral debate. So the youth were the ones that actually asked the questions. So they are currently, this is a volunteer position. They are recruiting for youth to be part of this board. So, and that, like I said, that's SLACO. So I think I can be able to find something to post for that also in the link. But so we're going to turn this over to Ebony, who I believe has an activity for us.
Yes, I do. So I'm going to remove these, you guys' pins. So, all right. And so we've heard a bunch about St. Louis ReCAST, different efforts that are going on in the region, forward through Ferguson, and also to just about PB in general. And so, we have some time. So I was like, I want to take at least 10 minutes to kind of just give you all on the call a little snippet of what this actually can look like. And so that being said, we're going to do a short activity. And so I'm going to need you all to, for a moment, I'm going to set up a hypothetical scenario, and we are going to work through this together. And so I want you guys to first, we talked about with the design, right, that there's always some sort of framework or parameters in place that can kind of decide, what the budget is and what that money can actually be used for, And so for our imaginary example, here we go. So let's imagine that all of us on the call, watching on Facebook, that is here in this Zoom room, that we are a part of, we are members in a community group, and we've been working together, you know, coming up with different ideas and trying to figure out how we can really use this PB thing in our community. And then we found out the organization that we've been, you know, working with, they let us know that we actually won $50,000. Okay, we have $50,000, that's our budget, but there are 3 areas that that money could go towards, okay? And so for those on the Zoom call, I'm gonna launch a poll. And so those watching on Facebook, I want you all to type your answers right in. And so we have 3 areas that we can use this 50,000 towards. It can go towards police legitimacy and reform, us creating ideas around solutions around that. It could go towards addressing school closures and enrollment decline in our local school districts in our area. Or it could go towards us designing projects as it relates to partnering with faith-based organizations in our community. So I see that some of you have already gotten started. And so take some time, think about it, in our hypothetical situation here, which area do we wanna lean into? We know that they're all great and things that the community needs, but at this moment in time, how do we feel would be the best way for us to put this money towards and creating solutions around? And so take your time, there's no right or wrong answer here. Those who are watching on Facebook, drop it into the chat box. So the choices are police legitimacy and reform, addressing school closures and enrollment decline, and then also partnering with faith-based organizations. Okay, ooh, 2 are running tight. So I didn't think about if we had a tie, but this is good, right? Because this could really happen. So everybody go ahead and participate in that poll. I'll give you a few more seconds while I check. If you aren't able to do the poll, then drop your answer, your thoughts about this into the chat box. All right. And so I am double checking to see if anything came in on our Facebook about this.
Be able to find something to post for that also on
Facebook about this. Ooh. Okay. All right. So I am going to close the poll and let you all see what you actually decided, what area you all decided that we should focus on. And so I am going to share their results so that you guys can see. All right, so it was a close tie. It was close, but 47% actually said police legitimacy and reform. Okay, and so we are going to continue now that, together we've come to a consensus. If there are any volunteers, if anybody wants to share their thoughts about that, because of course, if we were meeting, we would hear each other's thoughts about, why this is the direction that we should go. If there are any volunteers who want to share, you can press the little raise the hand or throw it in the chat box. No pressure though, because we know what the answer was. So, okay. And so now I would like at least 2 volunteers.
Ebony, Miss Webb has her hand raised. Sorry.
Okay. I missed that. Miss Webb, you can go ahead and.
Hi, Ebony. I think that is a good choice, and based on that is our choice, even though mine was the second one, because it's such a critical factor in our lives from A to Z, from east to west, that is a good place to start with police reform, because the residual effect from that can help us with the other two that were on your list in the survey. So I do think that's a great place to start.
Thank you for that input, Ms. Webb. And so now that I see Ms. Butler too has her hand up. Ms. Butler, would you like to go ahead too?
Okay, so I just want to make sure I didn't miss. We're talking about why we support that issue, or why we think that's a good one for now.
Oh, so we had those three options, because when we were awarded the money, just those were the three options that we had to choose from. So within the framework that we were working in, those were the three, and then from the votes, that's what happened. And then this is our hypothetical situation here. So.
Okay. I didn't know if you were asking why we supported those or not.
Yes.
Okay, yes. I think that right now there's so much energy already around police reform that this is the time to push that, because there is so much activity that has happened, and we also have people in place, like a new mayor. We have Kim Gardner, attorney, district attorney. We have Wesley Bell, district prosecuting attorney. So there's so much synergy of change that is going on, that this is the time to move that ball.
Got it. Thank you, Ms. Butler. And so now we know the area that we are working on, and we just have a little bit of time, because this is just showing y'all how exciting this actually is once things are rolling. If in the chat box, or if there are any volunteers who off the top of their head, may have an idea about a solution that we could actually use when we are doing this.
So Ebony, this is Paula. Gwendolyn Hunter has her hand up. I don't know if she commented or not. And then there are actually some comments in the chat box about. So yeah, Lady Ashley says these are most definitely a lot of organizations, the community members doing work around this. And then Theta Pierce said if the community members aren't safe in their communities, and other options will be negatively impacted. And then the one question was, could we split the money?
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for keeping us updated on that. So, in a meeting, we have our vibe and everything. So you see Ms. Paula is falling right into their role. And so, in helping facilitate the group conversation. And so, for the purposes of this, glad I'm back. For the purposes of this, we weren't able to split the money. We were only able to use it towards one thing. And then also too, my question was, for the feedback was, if anyone had any specific maybe solutions that they thought, or projects they thought we could do in relation to the police reform and legitimacy. And you can throw that in the chat. And if not though, this really just kind of shows, and I'll kind of stay paused if anything comes through, but this kind of just really shows kind of what those community meetings look like, right? And so of course, what was that? I'm sorry.
This is Gwen Hunter. I've been having my hand up for a while. And
yes, ma'am.
I'm not against police reform, but I think the better use of the money would be the schools and the closures of the schools, because that's one of the things that is messing up our community, the school. Mm-hmm. And I think if we start with our children, educating our children, giving them activities and having things for them, then we would cut down on a lot of this crime and other things going on. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree.
That.
Yeah. to lift up what Gwen said, because I think a large part of reimagining public safety, because I'm just going to say for myself, I don't believe a flawed system can be reformed. I don't think that. But looking at the work that has been done with Action City St. Louis, the Action City Power Project around Close the Workhouse, a lot of conversation and canvassing going that has happened within St. Louis with nonprofits and with community members. And also looking at the role that police and public safety even play in our schools and how that's really inequitable, specifically for Black and Brown youth, and how it leads to the school and prison pipeline. Like Audre Lorde said, we don't live single issue lives. So I think that very much feeds into what Gwen talked about. And I think a good first step, I really believe, when we talk about capacity building, lifting up community, is seeing who is doing the work and where we can plug in. And also asking within our capacity and what we have to offer, is there anything new that we can add to what is happening, or are resources better used in supporting what's already going on? So I think those are two really interesting things that we can look at and consider. So do we reinvent the wheel and start something completely new, or do we say, hey, this is what we can do and what is needed?
Thank you for the input. And so that is amazing. And in the chat box, I saw that, Megan said, building off of what Lady Ashley just said, that, when we look at funding and solutions, we should really look at who is already doing the work, right? And what research shows. I see people agreeing with Ms. Hunter, and that also too, that, schools may close due to crime in the community, and that's why public safety is needed. And so I think if we piggyback around or circle back around to something that came up earlier, was about, can we do more than one? What if we got creative and we looked at it from the lens of police legitimacy and reform from within our schools, and then we found a way to tie it together? And so thank you guys for participating in that. We only had, a short amount of time. And of course, if we were really doing this, we would be meeting over multiple occasions to really get all the ideas and work together to come to a consensus on eventually what some different project proposals could be before we took it out to the general community to be able to vote on the matter. And so I know that in and of itself was exciting, just in that small bit. So I know you can only imagine, like, okay, yeah, this really is really good work and things. And so thank you guys for participating in that. And I may have a little surprise when we begin to close. So I'll kick it back to you, Megan.
All right, thank you all. That's just a snippet of like what it can look like when we all start throwing out ideas and stuff. And then taking especially the ideas that Lady Ashley spoke about, and how we make sure we have norms and like what kind of language and stuff we're going to use in those spaces set. This work can just build. So I just really want to say thank you to everyone for all of our panelists and for all of you that joined in today. I hope you're all as excited as I am to start delving more into participatory budgeting and how you can bring it to your community. I'm excited to find ways to bring it to my community. Make sure you check out the chat box for all the links that we share. We do have more webinars coming up, so make sure that you are registering for those. And again, thank you so much. And I'm going to send it back over to Ebony for closing remarks, and maybe she said something exciting for us.
Yeah.
Ebony.
And so, yes, you all, thank you for everybody that joined this afternoon here in our Zoom room, for everybody that's watching live on our Facebook, for everybody that will watch the replay of this. We are super ecstatic that you took the time to be with us this afternoon and learn more about participatory budgeting and what it means. And so, my hope and my desire is, I mentioned at the beginning that when we asked people people, you know, kind of what they knew about participatory budgeting, that, you know, most of everyone that joined today had never heard of it, or they heard of it but weren't quite sure what it was, and definitely maybe, you know, how they could use it. And so it is, you know, my hope that after this you all feel confident in knowing what it is and how it works, and how, again, we can reach out to the different people in our community, organizations, our schools, you know, our council members and things of that nature, about how we can really tie this in and really have community voice a part of the process. And so I want to say thank you again to my teammate, Miss Paula Sutherland, who was rocking all the links and things in the chat box. And then also too, I want to acknowledge any members that are a part of our core advisory board at ReCAST. Several of them are on the call. They are a part of some of the organizations in our area. And so they help do this work. If they too want to drop their information in the areas that they work around, some of our ReCAST funded contractors, if you know that, you know, some of the programming that you do aligns with some of the things that were coming up on today's call, you know, share that resource, because, you know, some people just may not know about it. And then also too, I want to thank our community guiding board members. They are the ones that shaped out this webinar series that we are having. You know, Megan is a member of that, and she did an awesome job as a moderator. And so, you know, it just goes to show that, you know, our community, you guys, you know what needs to be happening, you know how it needs to happen, you know where it needs to happen, and you have the ideas. Even in that little 10 minutes, the ideas was coming, right? And so, you know, I am just really grateful for you all, and they have some awesome things. We are going to be continuing this webinar series for the next 2 Saturdays, same time, same place, same link that's been shared in the chat box. And for the surprise, next week, the topic is actually about community organizing and collective voice. Okay, so today we were really leaning into our individual voices and using participatory budgeting. And next week, we have an awesome panel that is going to be speaking about initiatives that they are a part of as residents, or their community organizing grassroots level organizations are a part of. And guess what topics that they are organizing around? Police legitimacy and reform. So we will have the Violence Prevention Commission, Jessica Myers, will be speaking about those efforts next week. We'll have Charlene Mack from We Power, who will be speaking about their What's Next St. Louis Public Schools initiative and work that they are doing, and how you all can get involved in the work that they are doing about the school closures and declined enrollments within the St. Louis Public School District. And then also too, we will have a previous ReCAST delegate and neighbor leadership fellow, Lisa Potts, who will be speaking about the importance of partnering with faith-based organizations and how to navigate that, and how she's been able to partner with faith-based organizations to do work within the community for the areas that they serve. So even though the $50,000 was hypothetical, those issues were not. And as you all mentioned, how it's important for us to tap into what's already going on in our area around that, and how we don't have to reinvent the wheel. They will be able to share some insight on what's going on and how you can get involved. So thank you. If there are any wrap-up questions or any last comments or anything that someone had, we have about 5 minutes left. I did want to acknowledge if anyone had any final thoughts or questions, then ask them.
Because I watched her do it 2 or 3 in our dialogue. We just stepped back. She stepped back.
If I could mute, if you could mute your devices.
So those are the couple things I want to say.
Trying to find it, but. All right, and if there are no other questions or anything, then thank you for everyone that's watching on our live feed. I am gonna stop that, And then thank you to everyone in the Zoom room. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.